Good
We're now
evening,
live
everybody.
here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Good evening, everybody. This is the February Ed Policy and Directions Committee meeting. My name is Trustee Mabobi, and I will be your chair tonight. We will begin with the acknowledgement of traditional territories. The Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Can I please ask for somebody to vote or to motion to approve the agenda for this evening? I see Trustee Bayo. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Next, we have approval of the minutes from last month's Ed Policy meeting. Can I get a mover? Trustee Bayo. And is there any discussion or amendments before we vote? Hearing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Hearing none, moving on. There are no presentations to the committee this evening. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Shelley Meany for the ESLR report.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair Mabobi. Nice to join everyone this evening. So I just want to welcome you. We're really excited to actually spend some time with you this evening to go over the conversation around Indigenous education. We have been really intentional, I think, in the way that we have developed our presentation for this evening. We've done it with a global look across the school district, right? So what does that look like from an Indigenous education lens for the Greater Victoria School District? And then we're going to look at what does that look like for activating it across the middle years. And then we're going to actually go into what does that look like from a school within the middle years. So we're going to really try to tie this thread together in all of the conversations that we're having this evening. So I do encourage questions at the end if there is any, because I think you're gonna hear some really robust things that are happening. And so I'm gonna ask Andy. Andy, are you going to steer for us this evening? So
Yes,
with that, maybe if you start, then I'll just, yeah, okay, excellent, thank you. So we can start on slide number 3, I think. Excellent. So this evening, there's 3 of us that are going to be sharing with you this collective story of Indigenous education. For those of you that know me, my name is Dr. Shelley Meany, and I'm the Director for Indigenous Education within the Greater Victoria School District. I have a mixed ancestry. I'm Cree from Atakakook Creation through my mother, which is part of the Robinson and Ahenakuse families from Atakakook Creation, which is just a part of Treaty 6 outside of Saskatchewan. And through my grandfather, I'm Métis, and I'm part of the Ross and Villeneuve families. And so this evening, we've invited Colette Crisante, who will introduce herself throughout the slides. She's our Indigenous teacher education consultant for the Indigenous Education Department, and her focus is on the middle years. And so she works really closely with schools all across the middle years and supporting as a transition from elementary to into the middle years as well. And then we've invited Vicki Roberts, who's the principal of Glanford Middle School, to be able to share some of the work as we start to action that, not only from a district level, but from a middle years level into a school-based level. And so you're going to hear 3 different perspectives on how we're weaving this work intentionally and collectively across our system. Next slide, please, Andy. Okay, we can go one more. So one of the things that we really wanted to really start with is the fact that as we enter into this work, we really do acknowledge and recognize that it's important for us to position ourselves within the work. So Greater Victoria School District is located on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, for which we have a relationship with and for which we're navigating through what does it look to position ourselves within the work. One of the things that we also recognize is that we all have across the entire education system a culturally biased worldview that's influenced the way that we see the world. And so sometimes what is important for us to navigate is recognizing that sometimes we may see the world and assume that other people are seeing the same worldview that we have. However, those assumptions can occur, and our role is to help navigate through how do we expand our worldviews to see what we aren't seeing collectively together. So I think that's important because one of the things that you're going to navigate through hearing this evening is that we're moving through shifting a system from a culture of low expectations from the Auditor General's report on Indigenous education and what does that look like within schools and across school systems, across the province and locally. We ask for what does it look like to have relational accountability? So really leaning into the 5 R's, the work that we've been doing collectively as a school district, but what is relational accountability? And how do we have that not only with each other, with our students, but also with the families and the communities that we're in service to? And as we start to navigate through weaving that, we talk about what does it mean to be an ally and what does it mean to be an accomplice? And how do we move through both spaces? Because we actually need both within an education system. We need allies in the work and we need accomplices in the work. And so starting to understand and take anchor, what does it mean to be an ally and how and whom determines that? And what does it mean to be an accomplice? Because they're two very similar yet very different things, right? One looks at the way that we move through systems through shifting the way that systems co-construct or construct themselves, right? And that's moving those structures to make sure that they have equitable opportunities for the learners for which we're serving. And in this discussion, we're talking about Indigenous students and families. So how are we and how are we responding to being an accomplice within that work inside the education system, and what structures are we looking through? In committees like this, education policy committees, right? We're looking at the fact that what are the constructs that define us for the work that we're doing, and are there any barriers or parameters that are put up that are restricting us actually from maintaining and moving forward in a good way? Also, how are we arriving in those spaces as an ally? And what does it mean to be an ally? And whom defines that? And so we've had lots of discussions and ongoing discussions that we'll continue to have, is that the ally and an ally is determined by the recipient of the service. So we cannot call ourselves an ally. The ally is determined by whom we're working with and the groups that we're working with. And so it's up to those individuals to be able to identify that, yes, Trustee Mavis is an ally in the work, right? Like, and I just use this as an example, right? So then that way it's not Trustee Mavis saying, well, I'm an ally, right? It's being able to determine that the community sees Trustee Mavis as an ally, and what are those characteristics to identify that. And so that is some of the work that we start to position ourselves. So we're sitting with classroom teachers, we're sitting with school communities, and we're sitting with students, because students are also ebbing and flowing through that. So then that way, we're not misinforming the difference between an ally and an accomplice, because we really know that people are really trying to lean into the work in a good way. So we want to make sure that they're feeling supported through that, with identifying what does that look like and feel like. Which all ties into the danger of a single story. We've been doing tons of work there. And the danger of a single story really focuses in on, what are the ways that we're bringing in learning in action into our school communities? What does it actually look like and feel like? And are we being diverse in the way that we're exploring our resources, our research? What's guiding our pedagogical practice? Which authors and scholars are we leaning into to help us with that work? What resources are we bringing into classrooms to help explore that for students? And is that relevant for whom the population that we're serving? Right. So if we're navigating through Indigenous education and we're looking at what is our collective and relational accountability to the work, then our question goes, are we ensuring that we're not going to fall into the danger of a single story by only having particular access to certain resources that may not be relevant to Indigenous learners or the communities for which we're walking within, right? And so I think for us, it's taking the time to be intentional, to slow down, to unpack that, to understand what does it mean to sit within your positionality for the work that you're in. So for us this evening in this room, we're sitting here. What does that mean for us to understand our positionality in the work for Indigenous education within the Greater Victoria School District? And what do we need to be really curious about, so then that way we're exploring that with the right intentions that are tied to the stories of this place, and we're activating that, and we're not ignoring that, and we're being intentional. Next slide, please, Andy. So for us, I've put some documents that are on this slide. There's many different documents, and so I'll make sure that you're all provided with a resource package that we've been working through and developing. But there's lots of different guiding foundational documents that guide the work of Indigenous education that not only do we need to be aware about, but we need to look at how it's coming into our practice, no matter what role we have in this room. And so we can look at it from a governance lens, we can look from it from a leadership lens, we can look from it from a teaching lens, we can look at it from a parental lens. And so we really need to be able to understand and examine that all of these different areas and foundational documents guide the work of Indigenous education. They're all woven and have intersectionality together. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're activating them in meaningful ways that are reflective of what these reports say. So for us, what do we know? We know that the Greater Victoria School District has 1,540 self-identified Indigenous students within our school district, and that we have a collective responsibility to each of the houses that we represent. And so the houses are Songhees Nation, Esquimalt Nation, the Métis Nation, and UFIA, which represents for the Urban People's Indigenous House Advisory. And of the 1,540 self-identified Indigenous students, we have representation in each and every one of these houses. And so for us, our collective work is to be able to understand, how do these documents that we're informed by, are we viewing them from a distinctions-based lens, and how are we in relationship with the communities that we're serving in helping to understand and further activate and implement these documents? So when we're looking at aspects of like the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and what's that draft action plan and the action plan now, what does that say? What does the distinctions-based approach say? What does UNDRIP say? What does the TRC say? What does the audit, this is the Auditor General's report on Indigenous students in the public education system, what does that say, right? And what are these key areas that overarch a message that has been navigating through the education system for well over 52 years? The message continues to be the same, right? How are we in relationship with the communities that we serve? What does that look like for bringing parity and equity to Indigenous learners within the education systems that we work within? And how are we doing that in a good way that is upholding the voices of Indigenous people inside the system and within the communities that we're serving? So as we draw all of that together, we also know and recognize that the Ministry of Education and Childcare shifted about 8 years ago to have the curriculum revised to reflect Indigenous perspectives and content across all grade levels and subject areas within the education system. Not only the new Indigenous graduation focused course that you've heard about and that we've spent time with, but in all grade levels and subject areas. So we have a system responsibility on the way that we're moving through every classroom in our entire school district, not only for Indigenous children and examining the way that they're experiencing education inside SD61, but also for all learners and all staff to ensure that we're upholding the stories of Indigenous education and resources and the way that we're moving through learning that's happening inside our education system. Next slide, please. Which leads us into some of the things that we need to be critically aware of, right? We recognize that system transformation requires not only the recognition of the responsibilities that the education has to Indigenous learners, but also to their communities. And this transformation can only occur through the ongoing development of tending to these relationships that support the needs of Indigenous learners and families. And how we're doing that and moving that and activating that is anchored in the 5 R's, right? And so we're really spending time not rushing through this, but understanding what does that mean to have reciprocity between the education system of SD61 and the communities for which we serve of the 4 houses. What does that look inside the system? What does that look like in the relationship to move with the community? What does respect look like and feel like? And if we were to observe it, what does that look like? Is it relevant? So we look at relevance and we really lean into the fact that, is that learning opportunity relevant for the Indigenous students for which we're serving? Is it relevant from a distinctions-based lens? What do we know about the data? What is it telling us? What are the resources that we're purchasing? What is the Board of Education spending and making decisions on as it relates to the 5 R's and moving through for the support of Indigenous students? We talk about collective responsibility, right? We talk about the fact that every area of the education system holds a paddle, right? And that we're not in many different canoes. We're in one canoe. We have this paddle and we're all collectively pulling forward together as this collective family. And that nobody's being left behind within that. We're not leaving people on the shore. We're not dropping you off in a community and leaving without you. We're all actually saying collectively, we're moving together. And it requires all of us in that work together. And then we talk about relationships. And we know that relationships is the foundation of education and that it requires us to be in that relationship. And that because it actually tends to the fact of reciprocity, right? I can't extract, you know, from community or from each other. We have to have this reciprocity of a relationship. And that's what helps us move forward together, because we start to anchor in our trust. We start to anchor in the deep critical conversations that we need to have with each other. And we also start to find the ways that we're going to be able to move forward and share in, at times, you know, the different responsibilities that we're going to take, because that's actually the family work at hand. Next slide, Andy, please. Which is why we talk about pulling forward together, right? So we're talking about the fact that when we look at this big canoe for us, when we look at Stakaya and she's on the waterway, we look about the fact that each of those paddles in the water are pulling forward collectively in a direction, and it will require everybody to do that inside an education system. And in this particular conversation we're having, it will require every part of the education system to do that, to move Indigenous education forward. There's a role for the board, there's a role for staff, there's a role for leadership, there's a role for teachers, there's a role for support staff, there's a role for community, parents, and students. And at different times, we're going to be able to, you know, navigate through different waterways, right? We're going to be able to, you know, bring new people in to help with the coaching and the mentoring and the growth point. But it does require each of us to be able to see that we hold a paddle. And it also requires to see that we're not in separate canoes, right? It requires us to see that we're sitting there collectively together and we're coming forward in that direction. So what does that mean for us in the conversation? It means that we look at the Indigenous Education Department holds responsibility for targeted funding for Indigenous students in the school district, and that those programs and services align to the criteria for which we have around targeted funding. It also requires us to lean into cultural safety frameworks, right? And so when we look at the research for cultural safety, we look at the research for what does it mean to be culturally responsive, when we look at the work of where it came out of New Zealand, and why we've now adopted it and moved it into education. And I'm not saying SD61, I'm saying education, and Indigenous educators across globally have really looked at, you know, the way that framework from healthcare applies and fits really beautifully to education. And so how that's moving systematically, nationally, provincially, and internationally. And so when we look at cultural safety frameworks, what does that mean that we need to have in place as the education system? We need to understand not only the Indigenous research policy and governance structures that exist and coexist, and and that have also existed since time immemorial. Right, so we need to look at what is informing our practice, not only as governance in SD61, but the entire system of education for Indigenous education. What is current Indigenous research that we're looking at? So who are the researchers and the scholars that are looking at the way to move through education in ways that will support Indigenous learners within an education system that is oftentimes still upholding Western and colonial worldviews and practices? And what do we need to do to be able to examine policy and governance structures within those systems that exist? And so how do we move through all of that together and understand how do we weave that, that fabric of what becomes our local school district into what we're trying to better understand collectively as an entire system, not just as a pocket of a few people. We need to look at relational accountability and what does that mean to each and every one of us, and to be able to identify that if we were to ask you now, do you believe that you're in a relational accountability relationship? And who might be able to identify that, and what does that look like and feel like? We have to implement the 5 R's, and that requires all of us. We lean into Indigenous worldviews and perspectives. We're looking at authentic Indigenous resources. There's a lot of conversation right now around the way that we examine resources, the way that we examine authentic resources, whom the authors are, and being able to have validity within that. And so we navigate through that as a department with the broader community and with teacher librarians and with school communities all across. We look at the fact about what needs to shift in within teaching practice, right? As it relates to moving into, I'd say, the implementation of supporting Indigenous worldviews and perspectives across all grade levels and subject areas. How do we move into Indigenous pedagogy? And what does that mean? What does that look like? What does it feel like? How do we observe it? What does it look like in practice? What is evidence of that? That becomes our work, and you're going to hear that from Colette and Vicky for certain. Advisors, how are we leaning into, if we were to look at Indigenous education as the Greater Victoria School District, and you have this, department that's full of Indigenous educators that have purposely gone with training to be have that as a part of their practice, right? How are we leaning to be Indigenous informed through the advisors who have this as their background? What does that look like and feel like, right? And so what are we doing as it relates to Indigenous data sovereignty? This is a really important question, and we work a ton with the IT department and other schools and senior leadership as we're navigating through. There's areas around what it means for Indigenous communities to retain their own information, but also to navigate through what are we seeing and how are we doing that through protocol agreements, or how are we doing that through cultural safety frameworks as we're moving in that direction. And so what are those things that we need to know about, and how do we work together? We know that when we look at DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know that DEI does not fix racism. And I want to really clearly indicate the fact that we've had lots of discussions that DEI does not fix racism, and that we still need to find specific strategies that are focused on supporting Indigenous students within our school district, that are anti-racism strategies are very specific to supporting our children. And what does that look like and feel like, and how do we involve community through that as well, through the policy and through the ledge that has come through the government too. We provide a ton of professional development and in-service training that we encourage all members of the school district to be a part of. So this isn't isolated to a particular group. This is very open, because when we look at that, we all need to be in that big canoe. And so that becomes that collective responsibility for us. When we are intentional on offering professional development, we offer it with that purview. Next slide, please, Andy. Oh, okay. I get to introduce you. So I want to thank you for just listening to me during setting the overview as to what is Indigenous education from a global perspective. What does that look as we're trying to navigate and move it forward? And I'm going to introduce you to Colette, who is the middle years teacher consultant for the Indigenous Education Department. Colette's been in Indigenous education for a very long time in our district and is highly respected as an educator, and the community is very well know whom Colette is, but I will let Colette introduce herself as well. So I'm going to pass this over to Colette, and Colette, you and Andy can drive.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. And I'm just checking my volume. I have a new computer, first time that I've been on Zoom on it, so just making sure that you can hear me okay. I'm not talking too loud. Okay, good, thanks. Tansé Buzu Ani Nadijmaka Colette. I am Indigenous on my mom's side, and I'm English on my dad's side. My maternal grandmother is Cree and Métis, and my maternal grandfather is Cree and Ojibwe. He's from a reserve called Turtle Mountain. So I've had the privilege of working in the Victoria School District for over 30 years, and 20 of those years have been spent with Indigenous ed. When I first started, it was Indian ed. And I've worked in the First Nations kindergarten, and I've worked as an Indigenous counselor, and I've taught at high school as well. So a year and a half ago, I came back to IED in the role of the Indigenous teacher consultant for middle schools. And it's a real privilege to be doing this work with our middle school staff and students. So I'm just going to take you through what life is like for me in this new position, in this new job. So you're going to see on this next slide here, some of the work that I do, a lot of the work that I do is helping teachers build resources that they can use in their classroom, helping them bring Indigenous content, ways of being, worldviews into their classroom. So this picture of the bins that you see are just a very small sample of many bins that we have created for teachers to take into their classrooms. And in these bins, there are binders with lesson plans, links to videos, authentic ways to share this material in the classroom. So that's a small part. Well, it's a big part of what we've been doing this year. The books that you see are a reminder that it's our job to go through books, vet them, make sure that they are reliable resources by Indigenous authors, and how we can connect them to the curriculum, how teachers can use them. So we share examples, give lesson plans, ideas. The rocks that you see in the middle are a reminder of the workshops that we do throughout the district. And this circle of rocks is showing that we've done lots of presentations on how to bring a circle into your classroom. And we created a handout on how to do that. That's one of our popular asks is, can you just come into our classroom and just show us how to do a circle? There's teachers who are looking for ways to start. They're very shy or timid on how to do Indigenous content in their class. And this is just a real easy way to start that out. So on the, or just on our last Pro D Day, on Friday, last middle school and elementary Pro D Day, we opened up our library so that teachers could see these resource bins. And we had about 45 teachers come through our library and took out a lot of these materials. So they're really happy to get them, to get their hands on them. We really want to try to provide as many hands-on learning materials as we can for teachers. So the next slide is showing you just a deeper look at some of the kits. These are two of our more popular kits, the cedar weaving and the Coast Salish weaving. And we've got 4 of each of these in our library. And again, they come with a full set of a binder with lesson ideas, links to videos on how to, everything from stripping a cedar tree and how to do it respectfully, and lots of ideas of uses in your classroom. We're looking forward to bringing out more kits in the coming months. For instance, the traditional foods kit, Indigenous plant knowledge, Indigenous numeracy. But we have a lot that our teachers are always asking for. We can't seem to keep them in our library long enough. The local resource kit is really popular, seasonal rounds, Coast Salish art shapes, Indigenous worldviews, fireplace kit, the Métis kit, the medicine wheel kit. There's lots that teachers are very grateful to get their hands on. So the next slide is showing a picture of our IED library, which is housed at Margaret Jenkins. And we have an Indigenous librarian who runs the library. She's hired for half a day a week. Her name's Mattia Modern. And we spend time at the library every week. We go through the resources. We spent a lot of time, the term decolonizing our library, but weeding out materials that were old. All of our books now are Indigenous authors with Indigenous content that is reliably sourced. And our library also has those bins that you saw, but right now they're being housed at the IED department because there's not a lot of room at the Margaret Jenkins Library. So Mattia spends a lot of time giving materials to staff. We spend lots of time trying to highlight what's in our library. She's worked really hard on our Destiny website to show our bins, what's in them piece by piece. On the left side of the screen, you're going to see a picture of a newsletter that we started sending out. This was our September edition. And every 2 months, we work on a newsletter that goes out to all district staff. It's 2 or 3 pages long, and it highlights things that they can be doing in their classroom, community events, again, links to videos that they can watch, links to lesson plans. So those newsletters have taken a lot of time to construct, but now that they're done, we can use them every year and just tweak them as we go along. They're a real valuable teaching resource. We've had a lot of really good feedback from teachers on them. So on our next slide, these are questions that teachers ask us the most. And because we were always being asked, we decided to make a handout. What does local really mean? That's been a big one. Teachers are very mindful that they want to start local, but what really does that mean and what resources are out there? So we created that handout. And then the next one about language. Lots of teachers ask, how can I bring language into my classroom? And where is it? Where can I find it? And what we have to say to teachers right now is, you know, you really have to hold off on language because the nations are learning the language themselves, and they want their community to learn their language first before they share it with the outside. So please be patient and talk to your students about how language has been dispossessed, how language has been taken, and how now it's being revitalized. Teach kids about that instead of wanting to teach the language itself. And we're asking staff to just be patient and wait. When the nations come to us and let us know that it's time, we'll be ready. So the third sheet that you see is talking about what Shelley was mentioning, reciprocity, how to teach and model reciprocity, because the other question that we get is, who can I bring into my class? What elders are out there? I want to bring somebody in to do stories, to do language, to do art, to do weaving. And what we've been saying to teachers is, that's great that you want to bring somebody in. We get that because the curriculum says that. It's one of the first things that the curriculum says is bring in an elder. And so we're saying to staff, you know, there are thousands of classes in our district, but there's only a handful of community who can share with you. So how about this? Let's think of it differently. Instead of you asking, what can you do for me? What can you show me? What can you teach me? What can you do with my class? How about we change it and say, what can you learn about local nations? And then share with them and say, thank you. Look at this wonderful learning that my class did and all these things that we are learning about land and about revitalization. Thank you. And how do we switch that? So now you're giving to the nations instead of us standing with our hands out, asking them to always give to us. So that's just a way that we're trying to change how teachers can do that. And we're not saying go to the nations and share these great lessons that you've done and these great artworks and videos. Share them with IED, and we will find a way to show that good work either through our elders committee or with our local education workers. So yeah, those are 3 big questions, and hopefully that shed a little bit of light on how we answer them. So the next slide is showing some of the cultural activities that go on in schools. So while one part of my job is to work with teachers to bring Indigenous content into their class, another part of my job is to work directly with Indigenous students to do things that are above and beyond what the core requires. So this is just a small example of kids doing cedar roses. There's lots of cultural activities going on in many of the middle schools that myself and other staff help to start. So the next slide is showing a drum circle. This is a real popular one. Staff and students are starting to do drumming circles before school. They're practicing with their students, and even parents come sometimes and drum 15 minutes before school starts, 10 minutes even, every week. And this is a group of staff and students who are performing at an assembly. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. there's a lot of enjoyment in this and a lot of camaraderie. So the teachings of the drum are important. The passing on of the songs are really important. So there's some good learning going on there. In the other picture, you'll see a group of students in a home ec class. So they learned all about the history of bannock, and then they made bannock and tea, and they're sharing that with me there in their class. So next slide is showing Lahal stick games or bone games. Many schools are starting to play these, and some students are starting to make their own Lahal sits in their woodwork classes. And our goal is to have Lahal tournaments in our schools and even in our districts. We use this as an opportunity to transition students from elementary to middle school, and then again from middle to high. So this picture that you see here of the students, these are actually some Glanford kids that have gone up to Reynolds School to watch and take part in a Lahal tournament. And it's actually a really good segue into Vicky, who's going to speak next. But before I pass it on to you, Vicky, I just want to highlight, there's a lot of really wonderful things going on in our middle schools. And, part of my job is to plant seeds and hope that staff will take on some of these endeavors. And I just want to share with you really quickly some wonderful things that are going on in middle schools. From staff Indigenous book clubs, so that staff are educating themselves. They'll all buy a copy of 21 Things You Should Know About the Indian Act, and they're sharing that. They're doing book clubs. There's student Indigenous book clubs going on. Indigenous plant gardens are being looked after. There's grade 8 farewell ceremonies. There are winter solstice celebrations. There's truth and reconciliation committees happening. There's Indigenous family teas and the use of Canada's First Peoples map being used really well in one of our schools. Fall family feasts are happening. School-wide land acknowledgements over the PA system every single day, and different students and different staff are doing land acknowledgements. So there's a lot of really good things going on in our middle schools. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'm going to pass it over to Vicky. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you, Colette, and thank you, Shelley, and good evening, everybody, and thank you, trustees, for having me here. I am Vicki Roberts, the very, very proud principal of Glanford Middle School, and not here tonight is Jenny Scott, who would be equally say the very, very proud vice principal of Glanford Middle School. And so here you have a little picture of our school, and I'm just going to share a tiny bit. We are a single track school with about 366 students and a very dedicated, caring staff of just over 40. And of our 366 students, we have about 24 students who are Indigenous, and our Indigenous learners, many are Métis, and then a great many come from across the island and across British Columbia. So we're very proud to work together as a whole school community, and really to be involved with a lot of work connected with Indigenous education this year. So Andy, if you can go to the next slide. I want to acknowledge that I have been at Glanford I'm into my second year, so just about a year and a half. And a lot of work has happened to support Indigenous education and support our Indigenous students and families over the years before I got here. And so I want to put that into the conversation. I'm here really to talk about the past year and what I've been part of, seen, and build on from what's happened in the past. And so I think, as we all know, over the pandemic, there was a lot of disconnection, and we weren't able to connect in the same way as educators and learners. And so I was at a unique opportunity coming to Glanford because we were at a place of really reimagining, invigorating and enhancing on what had happened in the past and bringing some of those pieces back to life in new ways. And so to start that, we really wanted to talk to our Indigenous learners and what was important to them. And then also with our staff and our families. And so over the past year, you see here some of the points that are really guiding our work. And so we ask ourselves, how do we connect our Indigenous learners and families to our school and to each other? How do we provide cultural connections and learning informed by student voice and curiosity? This is really important. We all know as adults, we're really, really great at sitting around and coming up with a lot of wonderful ideas. But if our students and our families aren't part of that conversation, then we're missing some important work. We also wanted to think about how we broaden from our school to the community outside of the walls of our school. And then, of course, we want to offer embedded ongoing learning in authentic ways for our entire school community. And that's really important. We want our work to be ongoing, to be threaded, to be purposeful, thought out, and for all to see themselves in it. And then, of course, we have to develop our knowledge and practice as caring and informed educators. That's critical for the work that we do. Shelley brought up the 5 R's and discussed that. And so you'll notice in the slides that I have woven in the 5 R's as they're related to the work that we're doing and guiding the work that we're doing at Glanford. So thank you. Thinking about, as I mentioned, our students, last year, a number of our Indigenous learners came to us and said, we need to get back together. We need to be together to have lunches or opportunities where we can learn and connect with each other as Indigenous students of Glanford. And so this year we really brought back, and we're calling it our Culture Connections time. And it's a time that monthly, where our students come together. We always do good things through food, and we work to bring our students. It's an opportunity for them to connect, to learn together, and for any adults in the building. And then as well, we really value that Colette and Luna have been really a big, important part of that work with us. Each month they come and join us. We start in circle. And when we started our cultural connection lunches this year, the first thing we asked the students was, what do you want this to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to learn? How do you want to gather? And they came up with lots of ideas. We had a big, rich list of ideas. And there's a few things that came out very loud from them. One was that they wanted to do different crafts, arts, learn about. So you see there's a picture, if you find a rock, they wanted to do rock paintings, learn more about different cultural practices from each other that come from their communities. So today I missed it. I was so sad to miss it, but they did a big Cultural Connections lunch and rock painting this afternoon. Another thing that we heard from our students is that they really wanted to see and do more drumming in the school. So I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, but we have brought, as Colette mentioned, we're doing drumming every Friday morning to start off the day before the bell. And it's invited any staff, students, or families. As Colette mentioned, we have had parents come, and parents actually have come and said, would you come to our workplace and do drumming with the community in our workplace, which we look forward to doing. And then another piece that we heard loud from our students was that we want to go out into community. So if you could go to the next slide. And they had lots of great ideas. You'll see a picture, the picture you see here with a whole bunch of learners from our school and Rogers, and we have Cookums and parents and Saanich police officers. We're very fortunate that many of our students who came to us for the past 2 years, I believe, Colette, is it 2 years, have been working with Saanich police. And they started a drumming program of making drums and drumming on a regular basis. And our students, who were at Rogers or now at Glanford, we're very fortunate to continue that practice this year. And what you see here is it was actually the final session of that 2 years of work. And as I mentioned, we had all kinds of family members, students from Glanford and from Rogers, and there was actually little siblings who weren't even in school yet. And we all came together to drum and celebrate and be together. It was joyful, it was rich, it was emotional, there was laughter and tears, and our students just coming together in that way. And seeing that their voice was heard as well. Like I said, I don't know if you remember, Colette, that they said, what if we go out and we do things beyond the school? And so we put that into action right away. Not only did we value the work that they had been doing before they came to us, but then we wanted to continue that for them. You'll also see, as Colette mentioned, they thought, what if we go to like the high schools, and what if we go to the elementary schools? And they really would like to just go on tour, I think. But a group of students went up recently to Reynolds and took part in learning about Lahal. They did some drumming, excuse me. And as Colette mentioned, this was a very, we hadn't really thought about it earlier in the year when we started thinking about the idea, but it worked out beautifully that some of the students who went up to Reynolds are going to be going to Reynolds next year. So this was such a wonderful way for them to get their foot in the door, to start seeing what it feels like to be in the building, to start making some connections. They're going to see some of those educators now and know, hey, I know that person. We were here when we were learning Lahal. And so it was a wonderful transition for some of those learners, and our families were so happy to hear that, as they know that their students are getting nervous about the next steps into secondary. So this has been a wonderful piece. We've got the students have lots of ideas of how we can continue to do our work in community, and we look forward to building that out. If you go to the next slide. When we move into Learning for All, as I talked about, we want not only to create learning opportunities for our Indigenous learners so that they can see themselves in the work that's happening in our school, but also so that all of our students are on a learning journey. And this is purposeful and authentic and embedded. Of course, there's lots of things going on here, many photos. I want to just highlight a few things. You'll see this picture of Be a Good Ancestor, and this is actually a big bulletin board inspired by the work of, oh my gosh, her name just, Leona Prince, sorry. So one of the ways that we're embedding work in an ongoing way is that our teachers have access to, everybody has a copy of the book, Be a Good Ancestor, and we're using that for an ongoing way to drive conversations of important words and learning, but grounded in what does it mean to be an ancestor? What does it mean to be a steward of the land? What does it mean to take care of this world that we live in? And so our teachers have access to lessons, to resources, guiding questions, essential questions, inspirations to learn more. And that's a resource that's available ongoing. So at any time they can pick up ideas and launch into that and do one-offs, building on, and so it's an available resource. And as you'll see just above, it might be hard to see on your screen, but students then, their work is showcased around the bulletin board. So as they're learning and developing and connecting their ideas, we're showcasing the learning that all of our students are doing through the school. It was really special to hear the teachers coming out when they had the guiding questions of what does it mean to be an ancestor, and all of our students started sharing of stories of special food that their grandparents made or important memories, and through that practice all of our students are learning together and valuing each other and considering just within the First Peoples principles of learning recognizes their identity. And so that's been a really important piece for our learning. Of course, we acknowledge Orange Shirt Day, but we want Orange Shirt Day not just to be about one day, about moving on and how is this something that's honored and considered and reflected on throughout every day. And so you'll see a little tiny felt orange shirt there because some of our students said, I don't want to just wear an orange shirt one day. So we actually took this on in that we created little mini orange shirt, felt orange shirts. So you can see them attached to backpacks throughout the school, on pencil cases, in their binders. So there's a representation that's carried on every day of the school year, not just on that one day, which is it's always fun. Every now and then you'll see a little felt orange shirt pop up in a new place, which we love. And we really looked at within that Truth and Reconciliation Week. You see one of our students here holding some Bannock. Lots of our classes took on where we wanted to learn in, we had Bannock making, we had Film Fest, our own little mini Film Fest. Students could do a rotation of learning throughout the schools and on their teams, where they could sign up for different activities that they wanted to learn more about. And so our teachers were really collaborating on how can we work together to create rich opportunities that students also have choice in and build on their own curiosities. And then, of course, you see there's lots of books and literature and access. As Colette was saying, we want to make sure that our teachers not only have access to resources that help guide their work, but that our students can see themselves in the work that is taking place in their classrooms. Next slide. We look at our professional practice, and as educators, we always have to ask ourselves, how does our teaching and learning have equity, inclusion, and access? And most important is, how do our students see themselves in how they're learning and what they're learning? And one of something I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing at Glanford is really reconsidering our assessment practice. And last year as a staff, we went together very purposefully, and we took many months. In fact, it started the year before I got there, and then we really took a lot of careful time on looking at our assessment practice. It's our one school goal on how do we use our assessment practice, and what we used was the principles of assessment to really help shape that work. And so we focused on together as a staff that we were going to use assessment practice that focuses on relationship, ongoing feedback, and clarity and alignment. And really the clarity is for our students and for staff. So any student who's going from class to class, grade to grade, can see commonality, can see themselves in this work. But most important is the relationship. And so how are we using our assessment practice to get to know our students, to drive our practice based on the students who are in front of us, and then also build relationship and connection? We have a staff book club that's starting up. I'm really happy. The books are going in staff's hands tomorrow. And that's really going to be also, so you see Braiding Sweetgrass and then Joe Crona's book. And that's going to be guiding our relational assessment practice as we get together with a little bit of food and learning and conversation. As Colette mentioned, we had Colette come in this year, which was wonderful, and Emma Milliken to do the circle work with staff. So we see that practice being embedded ongoing. And then also all of our assessment, or sorry, our professional development, whether it's literacy, numeracy, we're using Indigenous-based resources and learning. So there's multiple ways that staff are learning, not only in their pedagogy, but in their own practice and learning. So it's very purposeful and planned throughout. Next slide, and I promise I'll end very soon. And here's my last slide. We embed gratitude in all that we do at our school. This has been very important. And so we spend a lot of time sharing gratitude, looking at bright spots and celebrating the success. We have lots of places we want to continue to go, but most important is that we ask questions and act with curiosity. And that curiosity comes in speaking with our students, speaking with our staff, and speaking with our families, and making sure that we're all represented and continually evolving and building on what we're doing. A lot of that has come with inspiration and a lot of gratitude for the work and connections that we have with Indigenous education. We really have a rich relationship with IED department at Glanford, and we are continually grateful for that. So thank you for letting me share. That's a highlight reel. I could sit here forever, but I know I'm not allowed to right now. So thank you so much. And thank you, Colette and Shelley.
I just want to take a nice deep breath, and I just kind of really want to acknowledge with a lot of gratitude, not only Vicky and Colette, but really for sharing from the heart, right? Like when we talk about that heart work, right? That not only came truly through both of your opportunities to share and highlight the work that you're collectively doing, but I think that it also shows the woven elements of how we're trying to activate that across an entire education system. And so I have a lot of gratitude for both of you for coming tonight, this evening, giving up your evening to share in that work together. And also for those that are sitting with us in circle this evening, yes, we're on Zoom, but we are together in the story and the story work that we're putting together. And so I want to thank you also for taking the time and patience to honor the conversation that was required this evening. And hopefully you're able to leave with a perspective of looking at it from a systemic level and looking at the structures that kind of guide the work of Indigenous education to implementation, to moving it in action, and really looking at student voice and agency and our teachers and community as well. So I want to thank you for that. And with that, Chair Mabobi, I'm going to pass this back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nimi. Thank you so much for your presentation, and also to Vicky and also to Colette. Really amazing presentations. I want to take a moment to open up the floor for questions. Go ahead, Trustee Duncan.
Thank you. I do have a question, but I just want to start by saying thank you very much to all of you for being here tonight and sharing the good work that you do every day on behalf of students and families, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. It's always, being a trustee, there's a lot of ongoing learning so that we remain connected to what it is we're supporting at a governance level. And so hearing how you're activating systemic change and how you're continuing to be ongoing learners as well, it's really wonderful to hear. And yeah, my hat off to all of you for putting the student voice and the needs of families front and center. So with that, those words of gratitude, I do want to sort of increase my own knowledge of the supports that are available to enhance Indigenous students, their access to academic supports and services. And I'm wondering if you can provide us a little bit more sort of context and share the nature of those kinds of enhanced academic supports that are just focused on our Indigenous learners.
Sure, I can definitely take that one. I'm going to take it from a systems level, Trustee Duncan. So I'm going to talk about it from a department perspective. As we know, Indigenous learning and all learning is holistic. And so we may have aspects that are not just focused on academic support, but it's tying in social emotional learning, cultural learning, teachings. And so when we look at the whole child and holistic education, we look at that from that purview. The funding that comes to the Indigenous Education Department comes through targeted funding from the Ministry of Education and Childcare. And so through that funding, it comes with the responsibility to provide an enhanced program and service to all Indigenous children that self-identify as Indigenous within the school district and the school community. And we work through with schools annually on that process of the 1701. Through that, then we work with community in the 4 houses on the identification of the staffing of composition. So the staffing and composition that we would then identify to provide those programs and services. And so we've been in a radical change of service delivery over the last 5 years that we've been very open and transparent about, not only with the support of community on how to do that, because the one thing that is unique to, I don't want to say unique because it's actually not the right word. One of the things that we navigate through is that we have such a large urban district and every single one of our schools has Indigenous students. And so therefore we know that the funding that we receive from the Ministry of Education and Childcare is not enough to provide site-based staff in every single one of our schools. And so therefore we need to be creative when working with community on identifying what those programs and services are. So what we do know is that we have been able to shift the service delivery model where every single school does receive supports from the Indigenous Education Department through either an academic lens, a social emotional lens, a counseling lens, or just like Colette was talking about, Colette sits on a team and a middle school team that also has counselors, that also has Indigenous student and family advocates. And so as a composition of a team, they would do the wraparound support, just like Vicky was saying with Elena. Elena comes in and does a very different role than Colette, but between Vicky's school community, Colette and Elena, they will be able to provide some enhanced support programs to support, I'd say, Glanford at this time and other middle schools across. The signal that I think is important for us as a school district to really look at is that Indigenous students are the collective responsibility of all, right? And so just like Vicky was sharing with you as the principal of Glanford and the way that she's activating that with her school community, Vicky's seeing that her responsibility as a school-based principal is what does that look like and feel like from my purview or her purview? And I don't want to speak for you, Vicky, but I'm just going to give it from an example. What is the purview of the school's relationship in the sense that when an Indigenous child is a part of the school community, it is the school's community's responsibility to provide an educational program and service for that child, just like they would any child. And then when we look at the funding that Indigenous children are eligible for, they may be eligible for multiple streams of funding that are in addition to just Indigenous education. And so when we look at academic support, and I know that's the question that you're asking me, it's very complex because there actually needs to be multiple people in that canoe with us having that conversation, because it isn't just signaled at the Indigenous Education Department because the child identified as Indigenous. It's looking at the educational program for that child. And so that involves the school community, the classroom teacher, and any other additional services for which that child has been eligible for. And then when we look at that, then we need to be able to identify from a distinctions-based lens which child that community represents, right? So is the child coming from on reserve? Are they Songhees, Esquimalt Nation? Are they Métis? Are they urban? And then that will also signal the community involvement for how we're navigating through that support that that child is eligible for, because there may be additional supports available dependent on that house as well. So the complexity of it, as much as it can be a straight question, it can be a complicated answer because it actually really need to look at the sense that whom is the child and what are we trying to achieve to make sure that their access and supports for education are well-rounded and well-supported from a collective lens. And so that's why we talk about that collective responsibility. And I think the narrative that we're working really hard to shift in our own school district is the fact that I do think for a period of time, and community would agree, I think, on the sense that if this is an Indigenous child, Indigenous education has the responsibility for that. And we're saying that's actually, we're a part of that story and we're part of that narrative. And so together, yes, we do provide some enhanced services, programs, academic, social, emotional, and cultural teachings and all of that, but we're not the only lane for that. And so we need to be very clear, I think, even when we're navigating through that at a school-based level, a district-based level, or a governance level, and that you're able to confidently ask the questions for the system on what does that look like when we're looking at that from that purview. So sorry, that's a long-winded answer for you, but hopefully it provides some context for the table as well. And I'll ask Vicky or Colette, is there anything that you'd like to be able to add into that as well to support that question?
I think just to thank you, Shelley. I think to support that is that the collective responsibility is that just as Shelley's mentioning, if we have a student who is Indigenous, who we have identified, who needs additional learning support to enhance their reading levels or whatnot, they're going to make sure to have those services available, just as another learner would who has reading intervention supports and strategies. And we're really looking at each individual child. If I have a student, an Indigenous student who would benefit from some work with Elena and connections with home and bringing in additional supports and ideas, then I'm going to reach out to Elena and she'll make the connections with family. And so we're really looking at the individual learners, what would best fit for them, what sorts of supports are available, and making sure that they have access to whatever it is they need. So we might not have a targeted reading program, say for Indigenous learners. They're going to have that support, as all learners would, to help them succeed and build their skills and their academic development. And sometimes that means that if Elena's there, I can say, oh, can you spend a little bit of extra time reading with so-and-so? And that's another level of connection and time together. So I hope that sort of backs up what you're saying there, Shelley, is that we really look at each learner and what it is that they'll need and make sure that we've got those supports there for them and or family.
Oh, well said, Vicki. Colette, do you have anything that you'd like to add into there as well, my dear?
Yeah, because I've been in the system for so long, I know what we used to do, and I know what we're doing now, and we're on the brink of change, and change is really hard, especially when people are used to the old way of doing it. So the old way was, it's an Indigenous student, send them to the Indigenous staff. But that shouldn't be the way. And we're trying to get away from that. We're saying an Indigenous student belongs to everybody. Everybody's going to chip in and help the best they can. When those supports still aren't working, we tap into our Indigenous staff because they have connection to community. They might have a better connection with home. So that's when we can come in. We often describe ourselves as being the icing on the cake, but we're not the cake. The system is the cake. IED is the icing. So I hope that makes sense, because I've been in both systems. Well, we're in the middle. We're in the middle of really trying to make that change. And it's really hard, because for me, when I go into schools, I want to go and help where I see help is needed, but that's not really my job. The system has to take care of the children first. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah Moby, may I just ask if Trustee Duncan, do you need any follow-up on that one, or do you feel you've got some answers to that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think I applaud I'll call it a culture shift that is necessary and is ongoing and that we're working on. So I think at the governance level, we have an appreciation and support that culture shift in the ways that we can at the governance table. I think where I'm coming from is understanding the day-to-day operational realities, right? And how that culture shift kind of is playing out in practice. And with a trustee hat on, and we're in the middle of budget, and I'm trying to understand, okay, what are the opportunities? What are the to realign, to assess like how we're allocating resources? Is it equitable? Is it meeting Indigenous learners' needs? Are there gaps? What can we do about that? So that's really where I'm coming from. And in order, I think, to undertake that analysis at the board table of our budget, it really does require us to have the benefit of, your folks' expertise and how is it that is being implemented at school. So, for an Indigenous learner, how do we provide enhanced supports, utilizing both the targeted funding, but also the funding that all students have available to them. So yeah, I appreciate that it's nuanced and it's complicated. No, your comments have helped my knowledge move forward, and I look forward to, I know there's going to be lots of other opportunities too for us to continue to have these conversations about the kind of academic supports that are available. But I appreciate Dr. Nimi, highlighting that academic supports are just one aspect of the supports that we want to be providing all students. So yeah, look forward to more conversation about this. Appreciate you being here, and thanks for all of you contributing to an answer to my question.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also see Nissa Tamel.
Thank you, Trustee Mohmabi. I just wanted to say thank you very much to the speakers. As a parent representative, I I want to say that I appreciate the amount of effort that goes into pushing for change in the system, and the way that I see this as we have more conversations as parents around what we're seeing in terms of classroom changes and changes in how First Nations content and learning styles are being incorporated into the school system. We see it with our kids. We see it that, like, I just see the conversations happening more. And then the other thing is, I'm really heartened to see that more families who have an Indigenous background are, it seems to me, feeling more comfortable in stepping into that space and bringing up their concerns, which I know that's a huge step. So the work that you're doing in the district is huge in creating a space where people feel comfortable to bring their concerns forward or to speak their truth about what their experience is. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for the work that you're doing, and acknowledge how difficult and how challenging the making that change is. But I see it as a parent. I see it in the students that I interact with, and on the parent advisory councils across the district. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
Trustee Kwan.
Again, I will start with gratitude as well. I'm sure you've heard it from a lot of us, but I it's just so great to see what's happening, specifically in our middle schools, but I'm sure at every level, we can see that, games are shared, and we've got middle school students joining high school students to play games and learn for different learning opportunities. So some really amazing work going on. I think even further to that, we've heard a lot with just different facets of, institutions and bringing about change. Change is hard. And I think, I'm reminded that when change is made, it doesn't just, you maybe make a change for a specific person or, or a specific student or a specific level of student, but that change can actually help everyone. And so I think the work you're doing is really, really amazing, and is going to facilitate that change and really make things happen in our district. So first of all, just a huge thank you for what you are doing. And I just wondered if you could take a minute and just talk a little bit about sharing the experiences that you have. It's great to see this happening in schools, and it's great, change happens when you're able to share and mentor and exchange ideas and that kind of thing too. So how is that sharing kind of going on in our district with other schools? I'm sure there's other schools that are doing great things as well. And what's that sharing opportunity, and how does that work for you?
It's a really great question. I'm going to actually we'll probably all three respond to this, right? Because again, there's lots of different ways that this is occurring on purpose and organically. And so I think one of the biggest shifts in the Greater Victoria School District is being intentional in the language that we're using. And what I mean by that, right, is as if we're navigating through in that through line of understanding what does it mean to be culturally responsive as an education system, that requires all areas to have that discussion. So I would say not only is it occurring with you as the governance table, so board, right? I would say that we are activating it on purpose at every single one of our principal vice principals meetings, right? So we're seeing that organically happen. So we're coaching and mentoring and supporting and navigating together and being very curious through the senior leadership team at our PVP meetings, right? So then we can be applicable on coming back to classrooms and school communities. We also have 4 houses meetings. So we meet as a department every month. I meet between me and the superintendent. We meet with the 4 houses, and the 4 houses, either it's an LEA meeting or it's a meeting of UFIA or a meeting of Métis Nation Greater Victoria. And we're inviting other departments into those conversations on purpose, right? So then that way we're now navigating from, just like we said, 5 years ago, we wouldn't be ready for where we are at this place in time. So everything really requires us to pull forward meaningfully together. And so the place that we're at now, we're really seeing that the system, the education system, is examining itself from the inside. Right. And it's really looking at the way that if we're putting Indigenous education at the center, and that's the heart of a conversation, and we're looking at Indigenous students, we're now looking at what is the fabric that of support that wraps around that child, right? And inviting those relational opportunities to come into each one of the houses meetings, into department meetings. We meet as a department every single month. We bring together all of our levels. And then we break out. So we do the big work, the work that's happening in things that are guiding us from the documents that I informed you of when we started our meeting today, right? Sometimes it's looking at UNDRIP or the TRC, or looking at things that are coming from the ministry, or looking at areas of subjects in schools. And then we're breaking off into our leveled teams. So you're having, Indigenous education staff, and we're inviting department staff in, right? 2-3 times a year. Not only are we doing that with just our department and other departments, right, coming into the work, but we invite community in. So we have our Christmas gathering. We're having the 4 houses together. We have departments together. We have Indigenous staff together, and we're sitting and we're breaking bread together, and we're having conversation and maintaining and tendering to those relationships that are required for us to move, right? So then that way it isn't an isolated group of individuals holding knowledge, right? This is making sure that Nicole or Trustee Karen, who you're sitting beside me in the canoe, and you're holding the paddle and I'm holding the paddle, right? And we're just pulling forward together, because I'm not retaining or withholding information from you, right? So it's about like, how do we do this, and how are we moving that? And that's by doing it on purpose and putting people in the room and taking that collective responsibility. So I can say that from a department's perspective. I also I'm happy to lean in here to Colette and in the role that she has in the department, but also the role that she has with GVTA, right? I mean, she can share with you that lane. I think that Vicki can talk to you possibly about what that looks like from a school-based level, or principals, vice principals. And I'm also going to ask the senior leadership, is there other things that we want to contribute here? So you can kind of see the robust way that we're doing it, but doing it on purpose, and that it's not one overleading on the other. We're all sharing power in the sense of being able to move that intentionally together. So I'm not sure whom would like to go behind. I can go senior leadership, I can go Colette, I can go Vicki, or anybody else, or we can just move forward. Superintendent.
I'm gonna jump in front of Colette. Sorry, Colette,
go
if you
ahead.
want
Yeah,
to
go ahead, Vicki.
Okay. So I think has already, I won't go into too much detail, but I think what's really important is the intentional work that happens cross departments and also cross schools and cross levels. And part of that also is encompassed in the Enhancing Student Learning Report, where it isn't a department that reports about how students are doing, but multiple departments, and sharing that back with administrators in both leveled meetings and principal meetings to share best practices. It's not necessarily us sharing them, it's asking for people like Vicki to come to a meeting and share what's happening at Glanford, and similarly across the other schools. I think it is our role and responsibility to make sure that when things are working in schools, that we share those out, and when they're not, we share those as well, so we can learn from one another. So I think there's multiple means, but I do think it takes all of us to share those and be intentional with the messaging.
Mhm.
I jump in?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Colette.
No, you go ahead, Vicki. I'll go after you.
Yeah, do please, because I think collaborative opportunities are so important, and that's just the richness of learning, and that's we're actually modeling and doing the work properly if we're collaborating, sharing, and building on what each other's doing. And educators are like masterful at sharing, collaborating, and building on ideas with each other. And one of the things that I want to just share from a school side that I didn't mention before, but it's how do we learn about what's going on, and how do I, as an administrator, create the space and platforms and opportunities for people in our building to reach out and collaborate with others. And so I learn a lot in our leveled meetings, of course. There's all the structural pieces that I learned from other schools and from IED, but then what I need to do is do that same work with the teachers and staff in my school, and so create the opportunities for them to collaborate. So for example, we had one of our music teachers came at the end of last year, and she also does exploratory, and she said, I have this wonderful idea. I'm thinking about drumming, mindfulness, something to build out a new exploratory. Great idea. And so we looked at like, what would that look like if we reached out and connected with Colette and IED and started building and working together and shaping those ideas. So that work, that collaboration then builds on and spreads throughout the community. So, short answer is we have to continue to look for the opportunities to work and learn from each other. And I get that from my PVP colleagues, but then I want to share that as well and model that with the staff in our building. And shared Pro-Ds, that's another one that I should say. When we have those shared level Pro-D days where we can connect our educators across the district, sharing resources, ideas, and learning is a really powerful way.
When I think about the question that you asked, Karen, the first thing that came to my mind was there's just so many layers. When you go into a school, there's teachers who are, they've been doing this for years. They've been doing this work for years. They're confident. They're happy. They ask really robust questions. And then there's those teachers that are really nervous and scared. They don't want to do it wrong and they don't know where to start. So reaching out and trying to help wherever the teachers are at. It's really exciting because when you see a teacher who's timid and then they try something for the first time, it's like, hey, okay, I can do this. And then they have more and more confidence and then they bring other people along with them. It's really exciting to see. And there's a lot of really good things going on in our middle schools. So that list that I read at the very end of my presentation was just a snapshot of many of the other middle schools and what they have going on. But we even do work with pre-service teachers, and it's quite exciting to see these new teachers who are coming into our system that already have the knowledge, the skills, the understanding, and they just plow right into it. And then older teachers are learning from them as well. So there's really many layers that are going on. The one thing that's really unique for me being in middle schools that I get to go down to elementary and up to high as well and see some of the different things. I get invited in to witness work that's going on. So I can share with other teachers what I see in schools. If I get invited to go to staff meetings, I can share with staff what's happening in other schools as well. So, but I do think that the best gift that we can give our teachers is the time to collaborate with each other because they are their best resource. Teachers are the best resource out there. And just Shelley was mentioning that I am the chair of the GVTA Indigenous Ed Committee. I've been on the committee for the last 3 years. And the GVTA has been doing a really great job at honoring our Indigenous teachers in the district. We have 65 Indigenous teachers, and the GVTA has allowed those teachers to gather up to 3 times a year to celebrate each other and to just honor each other and lift each other up. And that has been, it's really made people come out of their shell and want to share about their indigeneity and about their culture. So, and actually Mavis has attended a couple of those events that we've had, but just in doing that and bringing the Indigenous teachers together so that we can see who each other is and talk and share and drum and eat together and do some crafts together. And then we go back out to our schools and we feel grounded and we feel connected and we feel, okay, we got this, we can do it. Because for many, many years, it always fell on the teachers, the Indigenous teachers in the district, all the work, and it fell on the Indigenous staff. And it's been a heavy load to carry. And but now, like Shelley mentioned, allies, and we're sharing the load, and it's really exciting. We are in exciting times. So yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's really, really great to hear. And thank you all for the context. It's really so exciting to hear about. I can't wait to until the next presentation.
And thanks for asking the question. Like, I really think that there's so much to learn about an education system, and in governance, you're absorbing so much, and we could spend hours and hours just really bringing you into our world. And I think you're asking really great questions, and hopefully you're going to leave with I'd say new knowledge, in the sense that, you know, there's lots of ways we're doing this on purpose, that we are really looking at this from what does it mean to be family. And I think we go back to the fact that, you know, we are not many schools, we are one house with many rooms, right? And so if we really look at ourselves and model that we are a collective family, and we have a responsibility for all of the students that we serve within the district, and we want to elevate that and do things on purpose, we really need to be in that work together. And it's not something that is isolated from each other, right? And I think that's where we're really moving ourselves together to that inertia of that. And I think that's the exciting time for us here in Greater Victoria School District, just because we're all collectively, you know, weaving that fabric. And I think it's not one person's responsibility. And I think that's our awakening here, right? And so you're part of that, right? And how you're going to ask questions, and how you're going to be part of that in lots of the other arenas that you're having the other conversations are that we're not in with you, right? So that's exciting too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It looks like there's one more question. Go ahead, Lena.
Hello. I wanted to thank the three of you also for such a wonderful presentation, a fulsome presentation. It was really nice to see the middle school lens, because we've spent so much time in the past year preparing for the grad required courses, that to see what's going on in the middle schools has been really wonderful, and the wide range of subject areas, like just seeing it weaved in so nicely. And I love that the transition to from middle to secondary, that's so important. My question, Shelley, actually, when you mentioned about the DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, specific to Indigenous, I was wondering if there are specific strategies or best paths forward to do this work, or just wondering if you could just expand a little bit on that.
Sure. I think that's thanks for circling back to that, Lena. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being in the room with us tonight as well. And for those that are in the room, we do a lot of work with Lena also as a department. She's really supportive in the work that we're activating, and helps with lots of the different you know, professional learning opportunities and things that we're trying to launch off the ground. So I think for me to respond to that question, Lena, is that there was a really strong conversation that took place a few weeks ago with community, in the sense about looking at how are we being intentional, and are we doing specific things that are Indigenous strategies, or are we using umbrella terms, and are we starting to dilute umbrella terms? Right. So the example I'll just use as cultural safety, because that's where the conversation was. So the conversation was around being culturally responsive as a system. We're asked, are we diluting the word being culturally responsive because we're applying it to so many different areas and sectors, but are we really being culturally responsive within examining what that topic is, or what that professional learning opportunity is? Are we applying that without the right context, right? And so do we need to stretch ourselves with very specific strategies within activating that? And then how do we become more intentional? It was a fabulous conversation, and one that I fully couldn't respond, but one I think we need to navigate as an entire education system. What does it look like to dilute hot topics in education at times, right? And all of those pieces, and how do we try not to do that, right? And so for me, the conversation about DEI really is the fact that as we're moving as SD61, or education in general, right, provincially, nationally, internationally, and looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, we also need to examine racism, and keep the fact that yes, they're a part of the work, but DEI does not fix racism. So we also have to have very specific strategies as an education system to examine the impacts that racism has within our school system. And when we look at racism, we cannot look at it without being very specific for what does that look like and feel like for Indigenous students. And so we're being asked to examine not only based on what the Ministry of Education and Childcare has put out in the anti-racism strategy, but also what is our responsibility to echo back? What are those specific strategies? So if we were to sit with community from a distinctions-based lens, they would see themselves within that, and that they're part of those solutions in developing those strategies, and they feel a part of that with us, and that we're not asking or developing things without them, and that we're also not blanketing it under an umbrella term of anti-racism education or strategies. And so that's the uptake of the work, I think, ahead of us collectively. And it's not there yet. Like, we're moving through there because we're now just starting to have those conversations. It absolutely will need to involve every area of the system in that conversation, because we all have to figure our way through how are we holding our paddle when we're looking at specific strategies for Indigenous learners that are anti-racism strategies, right? And what does that look like and mean for me and for you? And then how do we move that together for the student to ensure that their voice and the community's voice is upheld within that? And so I really do appreciate the question, and I think that we need to spend some very specific time collectively there. And so let's continue to awaken that. And I think we'll do some good work together. So I don't have a full complete answer for you, but hopefully that just gave you a bit of the response to that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Colette or Vicky, do you have anything on that particular, or are we good to hand that over to Chair Mabobi or Superintendent Whitten? Okay.
Excellent. So I suppose next in our agenda is actually adjournment. So can I please get a mover for adjournment? I see Trustee Bayo's hand, and all those in favor? And we are adjourned. Have a great night, everyone.